Picture this: 55 BC. A lone figure stands on the cliffs of Gaul, modern-day France, staring across a churning gray channel. He's a general, a politician, an author, and arguably the most powerful man in the world. His name is Gaius Julius Caesar, and he's looking at a mysterious, fog-shrouded island the Romans know only as Britannia. An island of fierce tribes, strange rituals, and untold riches. What happens next is not just a battle, but a collision of worlds that will shape the destiny of a nation for the next 2,000 years. This is the story of the Roman invasion of Britain. But why? Why would Caesar, already tangled in the complex politics of Rome and the brutal Gallic Wars, risk everything to cross the treacherous English Channel? The official reason? The Britons had been aiding his enemies in Gaul. Plausible, yes, but Caesar was a master of propaganda. He wrote his own history, and he knew a spectacular foreign adventure would capture the imagination of the Roman people, boosting his popularity and political power. There were also whispers of Britain's wealth: pearls, tin, gold, and slaves. For a man with immense debts and even greater ambitions, Britain wasn't just a strategic objective. It was a treasure chest waiting to be opened. So in the late summer of 55 BC, Caesar gathered 2 legions, around 10,000 men, and a fleet of ships. This wasn't a full-scale invasion. It was more of a reconnaissance in force, a military expedition to test the waters, literally and figuratively. But from the very beginning, things went wrong. The weather, Britain's most steadfast defender, turned against them. The tides and currents of the Channel, unfamiliar to the Mediterranean sailors, threw the fleet into chaos. As the Roman ships approached the white cliffs near modern-day Dover, they were met with a terrifying sight. The cliffs were lined with thousands of British warriors, their faces painted, shouting war cries and brandishing spears. It was clear a landing here would be a disaster. Caesar sailed a few miles down the coast to a more open beach, but the Britons were not fooled. Their agile chariots, a terrifying and uniquely British weapon of war, raced along the coast, harassing the Romans as they tried to make landfall. The Roman soldiers, burdened with heavy armor and equipment, hesitated. They were forced to jump into shoulder-deep water, struggling against the waves while being pelted with missiles from the shore. It was a moment of crisis. The invasion was on the verge of failure before it had even truly begun. Then, a hero emerged. The standard-bearer of the 10th Legion, the Aquilifer, holding the Legion's sacred eagle standard, shouted, "Leap down, soldiers! Unless you wish to betray your eagle to the enemy, I, for my part, will have done my duty to my country and my general." He then leaped into the waves and charged towards the shore. Shamed into action and fired by his courage, the legionaries roared and followed him, crashing into the British lines in a desperate, chaotic battle in the surf. The Romans, with their superior discipline and weaponry, eventually fought their way onto the beach and secured a tenuous foothold. But it had been a brutal, humbling experience. Caesar had landed, but he was in a precarious position. His cavalry hadn't arrived, his ships were damaged by a storm, and his supplies were low. He skirmished with the Britons, who used guerrilla tactics and their fearsome chariots to great effect. The Romans were masters of set-piece battles on open plains, but this was a different kind of war. After a few weeks of inconclusive fighting and facing the onset of autumn storms, Caesar accepted a nominal surrender from a few local tribes, took some hostages, and sailed back to Gaul. In Rome, he declared it a stunning victory, a triumph over the ocean itself and the wild barbarians of the north. The Senate even declared a 20-day public thanksgiving. It was a PR masterpiece. The next year, 54 BC, Caesar returned. This time, he was not taking any chances. He came with a much larger force, 5 legions and 2,000 cavalry, transported on over 800 ships, a truly massive armada for the time. This time, the landing was unopposed. The Britons, intimidated by the sheer size of the Roman force, had retreated inland. Caesar pushed deep into enemy territory, crossing the River Thames and heading for the stronghold of the most powerful British leader, Cassivelaunus. The campaign was a masterclass in Roman engineering and logistics. They built bridges, forged roads, and established fortified camps. But Cassivelaunus was a clever opponent. He avoided a direct, pitched battle, instead using his chariots to launch hit-and-run attacks, melting back into the dense forests the Romans struggled to navigate. He waged a scorched earth campaign, burning villages and destroying food supplies to starve the invaders. It was a war of attrition. Despite these challenges, Roman discipline held firm. They eventually located and stormed Cassivelaunus's capital, a fortified hilltop settlement, capturing it and forcing him to sue for peace. Caesar imposed terms. Cassivelaunus would pay an annual tribute to Rome and promise not to attack the tribes allied with the Romans. With that, Caesar once again departed Britain, and this time he would not return. For him, Britain had served its purpose. It had provided him with glory, wealth, and a dramatic narrative for his political career back in Rome. He never established a permanent Roman province there. In fact, for nearly 100 years after Caesar left, Britain was largely left alone by Rome. The invasion seemed like a temporary, albeit dramatic, episode. But the seeds had been sown. Caesar's expeditions had put Britain on the Roman map. Trade routes were established, and Roman culture, goods, and ideas began to flow across the Channel. British tribal leaders started to engage in diplomacy with Rome, some even visiting the city itself. The island was no longer a land of pure myth. It was a known quantity, a potential prize on the edge of the empire. It would take almost a century until 43 AD for the Romans to come back for good. This time, it was under the Emperor Claudius. Unlike Caesar, Claudius wasn't a great general. He was a scholar, an administrator, who desperately needed a military victory to secure his shaky hold on power. What better way than to succeed, where the great Julius Caesar had only partially tried, to conquer the wild island of Britannia once and for all. Claudius dispatched 4 legions, a force of around 40,000 professional soldiers, under the command of the brilliant general Aulus Plautius. This was no reconnaissance mission. This was a full-scale conquest. The invasion of 43 AD was meticulously planned and brutally effective. The Romans landed at Richborough in Kent and quickly crushed the initial British resistance in a series of decisive battles. The fighting was fierce, particularly at the Battle of the Medway, a 2-day struggle where Roman legionaries once again had to ford a major river under fire. But the superior organization, armor, and tactics of the Roman army were unstoppable. Within a few years, the Romans had conquered the entire southeast of England. They established a new capital, Londinium, modern-day London, and began the systematic Romanization of the island. They built roads, straight as an arrow, that still form the basis of many of Britain's major routes today. They built forts, towns, villas with underfloor heating and intricate mosaics and grand public baths. Latin became the language of government and commerce. For the next 350 years, Britain would be a Roman province. The conquest was not a simple story of victory. It was a brutal and often bloody affair, marked by fierce resistance. Figures like Caratacus and most famously Queen Boudica of the Iceni tribe led heroic, but ultimately doomed rebellions against Roman rule, burning Londinium and other Roman cities to the ground. But each rebellion was eventually and ruthlessly crushed. So, from Caesar's ambitious gamble on the shores of Gaul to the methodical conquest under Claudius, the Roman invasion was a defining moment. It was a clash of Iron Age tribalism and imperial power, of Druidic ritual and Roman law. It brought roads, cities, writing, and a new kind of civilization to Britain, but it came at the cost of independence and immense bloodshed. The legacy of that invasion is etched into the landscape and the very language of Britain today. It's a story of ambition, courage, brutality, and the unstoppable force of an empire at the height of its power. Thanks for watching our deep dive into the Roman invasion of Britain. If you found this story as fascinating as we do, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next historical adventure. Let us know in the comments what part of this story surprised you the most. Until next time.